Donnie Druin, Millard Thomas here of AllSunDevils, and we're here to discuss a little ASU football because, man, Donnie, after that last game to Washington State University, I'm just about ready to not watch another ASU game for the rest of the season. I mean, after that first quarter alone, I was pretty much ready to turn off the game. If I wasn't doing that live blog, I probably would have turned off the game because it was not fun to watch. It was a lot of turnovers. It was sloppy play, not great defense, and overall just a terrible game by ASU in a game that they needed to win. This team needed to win out, especially after that loss to Utah. They did not control their own destiny. If Utah wins out, they get the Rose Bowl. So ASU needed every little win they could get. And they ended up getting basically blown out by Washington State 34-21. Donnie, what did you see Saturday afternoon?
Not a lot of good things. And, even me sitting in the press box, I wanted to ask for my money back, even though I didn't pay a single dime for being in that stadium. I mean, it was just atrocious. First turnover in the first drive. Okay, whatever. These guys haven't played football in over a week, next bye week, whatever. Sure, bad things happen. Second turnover that came on the third play of the game. Okay, maybe bad luck, maybe. After the third turnover, no way they're winning that game. Not a chance. I mean, obviously everybody saw they dug themselves into a 28-0 deficit in the first half. I had thought that I had seen the worst football they played this year in the second half of that Utah loss, where Utah scored 28 unanswered points, and I was wrong. Yeah, this team continues to prove me wrong week in and week out, and not necessarily in a good way. 56 unanswered points from the second half of the Utah game that carried over into the first half of the Washington State game. And I mean, I guess we have to give props to Washington State. I mean, they had won 3 out of 4 going into the matchup. They had just lost their head coach and 4 other assistants, battled against a tough BYU team, 21-19. They ended up losing, and then they just strolled into Tempe, and they handled business. So big respect to them, big props to them. But man, it really felt like Arizona State lost this game more than Washington State won the game. We had 5 turnovers, I believe 7 or 8 penalties. So granted, they did cut down a little bit on that, but still too many penalties. Just coming out of a bye week, you really needed a strong performance, not to convince everybody else, but to convince yourselves that you were still very much alive in the Pac-12 race. And now you're sitting here with 4 games to go. You need to win the rest of your games, which last week seemed perfectly capable that you guys were able to do this. Now you don't even know what to expect for the final 4 games. And then on top of that, you need Utah to drop 2 more games in their final 4 in order to get in. You're asking for a lot of stuff in order to even make it to the Pac-12 championship game, let alone have a chance to play in the Rose Bowl. It's a lot of not great things going on right now. And I can't help but feel, and I hate pinning blame on certain people because football really is the ultimate team sport. But it just starts at the top, does it not?
I think it has to start at the top because, like you were mentioning, that Washington State team, they just had to let their coach go a few weeks ago at this point, because he didn't comply with their school mandate, whatever, with the vaccine. So he had to be let go. And you look at this team, they've taken off since then. So now it starts to pose the question to ASU. They do the same thing. If they let their coach go, will it propel this team? I don't know about that. I'm not sure. But this team coming into this game, one of the big things I was at least preaching, I wrote in the pregame of the live blog, discipline. Coming out the bye, this team needed to give us confidence, needed to give us a boost, needed to show that they can come out of a bye, scripted, looking crisp, looking clean, well coached, well prepared. And that's not something they did. In the second half of Utah, it was gross. It was disgusting. But I was like, coming out of the bye, they're going to be well prepared for this game. And it just wasn't the case. After the first fumble, I was like, all right, sloppy play, but Chip is a beast. He's only fumbled it one other time, I think, in his career, which was a couple weeks ago. So I wasn't too worried. But then turnover. ASU was just never able to get anything going in this game. And I'm not entirely even sure why. Why wasn't this team ready for WSU? Was it enough coaching from Herm Edwards? Are the players not soaking in the information? Why is there such a disconnect between the coaching staff and these players at this point in the season, off of a bye? And it absolutely makes no sense. And now, like you were saying, Utah has to drop 2 games. Utah had a tougher schedule than ASU, but ASU had a really easy schedule heading into this Washington State game and for the rest of the season. I think they only had to play like one team with above 500 record. Like, it was made for ASU to at least keep pace with Utah the rest of the season. And now that's doesn't even look possible. And so if you had to look ahead, like, are we even in contention for a Pac-12 game, a Rose Bowl? Like, what's the best outcome potentially for ASU at the end of the season?
Oh man, I really feel like the Rose Bowl is a big stretch right now. Granted, anything can happen. College football has produced some wild moments through the year, so I definitely don't want to discount anybody yet. But it's just kind of like keep level-headed, looking at things from an outsider's perspective. That's a stretch. I mean, it really feels like a Utah Oregon Pac-12 championship is kind of in the fold for us. I'm seeing things like the Alamo Bowl. I'm seeing things like the Las Vegas Bowl. In any of those like mid bowl games that happen like between that like Christmas to New Year's time period, that feature like Pac-12 versus Big Ten or Pac-12 versus SEC or anything like that. Pretty much the status quo for every single bowl game ASU has played for the last decade, pretty much. Nothing special by any stretch.
Yeah, that's not very fun because this is a team that I did kind of get roped into. They did get me believing earlier in the season because every week I watch this team, I'm like, they look pretty good. They really beat up on some opponents. Their defense, I think, is still like second in the Pac-12 in points per game allowed. So this team overall, like, offensive numbers are good, defensive numbers are good when you look at the points per game stuff, but there's just certain games, that BYU game, I forget the other game. And then you look at this one where it's either this was the first game where they shot themselves in the foot without the penalties. Usually it's like whenever they lost the other two games, it was like 13 penalties, 150 yards, 16, 135, like whatever it is. This was a game where they just did not want to win it at all because they just kept turning it over consistently. Fumble on the first possession, fumble on the second possession, interception on the third interception on the third possession. All those possessions turned into a little tongue twister there. And then they had another fumble late in that game. Overall, they had 5 turnovers plus a turnover on downs. And when you look at the second half of that game, on their second drive, they punted on 4th and 2, down 28-7. Like, Donnie, does this team even want to win anymore? Like, is there tanking in college football where you get a better recruit or something like that? Like, I don't understand why they did that.
I've gone to, before this year, I've gone to a handful of ASU games. This year is really my first year, like, in the press box and stuff. That was the loudest boo I've ever heard. Whenever Herm Edwards tried to punt team on that 4th and 2, I'd like, from there, it was just a really big downhill snowball effect that they really couldn't bounce back from. And like, I get it. Like, you don't want to give them short field position, but you're already down by 3 possessions. It's the third quarter. You've already turned the ball over 4 times. Like, what exactly are you going to lose from them, scoring again, which they ended up doing anyway a couple of drives later. So my big thing is, how are you going to be outcoached by a school that doesn't have a coach? And like, how like it just makes no sense. But like, also some of the blame has to fall on the players, right? I mean, Herm Edwards is not out there fumbling the ball. Herm Edwards is not out there throwing interceptions. Like, at a certain point, we can knock on Herm all we want. The players got to take some responsibility for this too. And it's getting a little bit tiring that we keep saying these kids are talented week in and week out, and they are. And I feel like that's what's extremely frustrating about this team, is that with everything going on with the investigation, with so many seniors stacked on this team, with no like really, really strong Pac-12 team this year, it really felt like if any year was going to happen for Arizona State to make a magical run, is going to be this year. And to watch those guys not even like get beat by good football teams, but to shoot themselves in the foot, like you said. 16 penalties versus BYU, like over 13 penalties against Utah whenever they lost, 5 turnovers against Washington State. Like, you walk away from those feeling more like the AllSunDevils had lost that game more than the other team had won.
Yeah, this might be the first game where I'm like, all right, Washington State actually stepped up to their play with their defense. But at the very least, this should be a 1-loss ASU team. And really, I mean, they should beat Washington State. Like, Washington State is 5-4 after this game. So that means they were just a 500 team entering the game. The Sun Devils statistically were better across the board. They got more talent, and maybe just across the board, we need to just stop looking at recruiting rankings, because it has to be tough to evaluate high schools from across the nation, try to decide these different skill levels and how does one guy compare to another guy. Like, maybe we just got to get away with the whole recruiting system, because it really messes with our minds of how we view these players and our expectation levels for these players. And when you look at a Jaden Daniels, this is someone that's oozing with talent, but the decision making sometimes is not there. And we saw that Saturday afternoon, 2 interceptions, only had a 60.1 QBR. I'm not even a big QBR guy, but that's pretty bad. So for Jaden Daniels, he's a junior. I think he can enter the draft if he wants to. But if he does come back to ASU next year, do you think ASU will maybe ride Jaden Daniels once again? Or is it maybe it's time to start looking in a different direction and maybe think about somewhere else? Or maybe look at the transfer portal, because there has been some whispers, maybe a Spencer Rattler, Arizona kid.
Yeah, so the Spencer Rattler rumors are definitely not helping Daniel's case, especially whenever he
Mm-hmm.
plays like this. And look, Daniels, for his credit, has been one of the most exciting prospects to come through Tempe in a very long
Mm-hmm.
time, at least at the quarterback position. I mean, we're talking about a kid who's the first ever true freshman to start at quarterback for Arizona State. And we've seen the talent that he's displayed through his 3 years in Tempe. So, it's not like this guy can't play football and this dude has no idea what he's doing, because
Yeah.
he does. And, like we've said on this podcast over and over again, he just needs to do the little things right, and he'll be such a really nice looking pro prospect. But again, like we've hammered on this podcast, he hasn't shown any progression from the Jaden Daniels of last year. I mean, it really looks like I'm looking at a carbon copy moving forward. And this kind of spills into another topic as well, Millard. I think if Jaden comes back, which I do think he will, I think
Mm-hmm.
he is nuts to enter the NFL draft thinking that he is going to get drafted relatively high at all. I mean, there's so much to work on whenever it comes to him. I do think he comes back. I think most coaching staffs would welcome him back with open arms, because I think he's a good college quarterback. I think he's very, very solid for the most part in what you can ask him to do, especially for a team like Arizona State, who loves to run the football and basically just ask Jaden Daniels not to turn the ball over and take a couple of deep shots whenever necessary and let the ground game do the work for him along with the defense. If there's a coaching change, though, they're going to bring in a whole new coaching staff. And Miller, what do you see every year in the NFL? You see new coaching staff take over a team, and they like to quote get their guys. And Jaden Daniels might not be a guy for a new head coach. So yeah, maybe an exciting guy like Spencer Rattler does come through for Arizona State, and maybe it's another guy through the transfer portal. Maybe a new coaching staff does like Jaden Daniels. But I think if Herm Edwards and company do stick around for another year, which is very much so in the air, I think Daniels comes back, and I think he's a starting quarterback next year. But you definitely can't rule out the possibilities of another. What's the word I'm looking for? Another roller, like another like staff coming through and just kind of like getting quote unquote their guy.
Yeah, and there is one other possibility, I guess, that we haven't mentioned. What if Daniels decides to come back to college and enter the transfer portal? Like, there's no guarantee that Daniels wants to be in ASU pass
Yep.
if he does decide to come back, because I think everyone was shocked when Remy Martin decided to leave ASU. It was like a fifth-year senior. It's like, Remy Martin, what are you doing? You could probably go enter the draft if you want to, but he wanted to go to, I believe he's in Kansas now. So for ASU, maybe Jaden Daniels comes back. Maybe he's the quarterback next season. Maybe he enters the transfer portal. Maybe he enters the NFL draft. So we just don't know with Jaden Daniels. But either way, this team has so many areas that they have to clean up. I think it's mostly offense. Of course, this wasn't the best showing for their defense, but overall in the season, their numbers defensively are still pretty good. I think Antonio Pierce does have a good lock on that defense. I mean, it's tough to stop someone when you're turning the ball over consistently the entire game. Like, really, the only bad showing we saw from this defense was that second half against Utah. Outside of that, this defense has been pretty consistent, stepping up to the plate all season. So when you look at Antonio Pierce's side of the ball being handled, but not Zach Hill's side of the ball being handled, that play calling, does it ultimately fall on Zach Hill's shoulders, or does Herm Edwards have to take more of the blame? Like, Is the offensive side of the ball going to be a point of contention entering next season? Because it seems like AP is going to be pretty, solid there. Even if they get a new head coach or whatever, feels like AP should still be locked in there. But do the offensive coaches, do they maybe have to worry about their job security as we're moving forward? Because I've seen some articles being written. I know some people are even calling for Ray Anderson's job, and I see why. Herm Edwards played in the NFL, coached in the NFL, was supposed to bring NFL pedigree, and he's been doing a great job of getting guys to the NFL. But in terms of making ASU look like an NFL product, it just hasn't happened yet.
Well, look, here's the thing about Herm Edwards. He was supposed to come to Tempe and instill a quote-unquote pro model. And that pro model, thus far, involves that, like, very, very drastically failing to hit expectations in the time that he's been here. And granted, 1 year was a COVID year where he only played 4 games. But even in that 4-game stretch, and you can say whatever you want, but like those teams also had to play in those games as well with everything going on. ASU didn't look great last year whenever they went 2-2. I mean, you mix the underwhelming results with the fact that like they just can't recruit in-state kids. And speaking of recruiting, you have the whole NCAA investigation still going on, by the way, which it looks like there's not going to be a resolution until after the season is over. I mean, like Herm Edwards was supposed to be able to walk into these kids' living room and be able to recruit not only the kid, but the parents, because the parents knew who Herm Edwards was. He has this great, mantra about integrity and doing the right thing, ensuring that whenever their baby boy is off on the way to college, they wouldn't have to worry because Herm Edwards is watching their eye. And from the investigation to the team's poor performance, I think all of that's out of the window. And I think that's very much so reflected in the recruiting rankings. I mean, Arizona State, I believe they have five or six kids in their 2022 recruiting class. That's the smallest out of any Power 5 school in the country to date. Just not great stuff going on in Tempe right now. But as far as the offensive coaches go, what's frustrating about Zach Hill is that, first of all, Zach Hill's a great guy. He's a really nice guy. And after games, he's more than happy to own up to his mistakes and, take credit where credit's due and, all that good stuff. The creativity is there. And I feel like we've talked about Ricky Parasol throwing touchdowns left and right. Almost every episode we jump on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the situational football for me. It's it's 4th and 1. Why are we in shotgun running Jaden Daniels up the middle? Why are we not handing Chip the ball? If you do want to run with Jaden Daniels, great. Get a guy like Rashad White to the outside of him, stretch the field and run something like an option play or something like that. Or take your ginormous quarterback under center and have him sneak for the 1 yard. Like it should not be overcomplicated like it is. Time and time again, Arizona State has gotten way too cute near the goal line, and even down to punting on 4th and 2 whenever you're down. It's just they're living in their fears too much, and with such a talented offense and with kids who can really make plays all over the football field, it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, I think another thing that makes it so frustrating is like everyone just seems to be so likable on ASU. Like Jaden Daniels seems like a likable guy. He's gracious with media. Zach Hill, Herm Edwards, like no one gives better quotes than Herm Edwards in a press conference. And yet it doesn't matter how nice you are. It matters what you do on the football field. And these guys' job security is going to come into question if they don't start producing. And you look ahead to, I believe, this Saturday. I'm always terrible with the schedule in terms of what time these games are. But ASU
7:30.
Saturday, 7:30. We got ASU versus USC. USC, I'm not exactly sure what's going on with their quarterback situation. Seems like both of them played last week. Keaton Slovis,
they're using like a 2-quarterback scenario because Keaton Slovis went down, and then Jackson Dart came in and just tore it up, and then Jackson Dart got hurt like the following week, and then Slovis came in again, and then like they've just been alternating. But Millard, they are not a good football team, brother.
Yeah, you want to say they're not a good football team at 4-4, but I would have said the same thing about Washington State. They just came in and mollywopped, ASU in Tempe in their house. So when you look ahead to this game against USC, and I would like to say USC isn't a good team either. I mean, they barely got past the U of A team. I mean, if U of A got their first win against USC, that would have made me pretty happy. It would have brought a smile to my face. But looking ahead to this matchup, like how confident should we have any confidence in ASU to put out against USC? Because even though we are saying USC may not be the greatest team, like I'm not sure if I should feel confident in ASU, especially if I was trying to put money on this game. It's a stay away. Like I'm not going anywhere near this game. I do a little prop bet, running back to score a touchdown, but outside of that, I'm staying far away from this game because it seems too volatile and too unpredictable right now.
Look, man, I know for the last 20 minutes we've just talked about how terrible ASU has looked.
Yeah,
I'm willing to give them one more week. I'm giving them one more week to get their act together. If they can't turn things around versus USC, they shouldn't even play the last 3 games of the year, including the home finale against U of A. I mean, if they can't beat this Trojans team without star wide receiver Drake London, by the way, who fractured his right leg and is out for the remainder of the season, Millard, did you know he had 88 receptions on the year so far?
88,
bro, 88 receptions.
I had no idea he had that many. I had no idea.
7 touchdowns on the year, bro. Just take a guess at the next highest amount of receptions after him.
I'm gonna guess like 21.
Bro, close, 32.
Okay, I'll take that,
dude. Their main engine on the offensive side of the ball, and look, I hope Drake London gets healthy. That kid is phenomenal. I mean, he is like a top 10 NFL draft prospect without a doubt. I hope he gets healthy, and I hope he tears it up in the pros if he doesn't decide to go back to USC next year. That being said, it doesn't matter who's that quarterback for USC. Like, their top offensive weapon is out. ASU's defense, if you're any ounce as good as we want you to be or as you claim to be, you need to go out there and stop them. And then hopefully the offensive side of the ball will come. But man, like this is like a perfect opportunity, especially with London's injury, to bounce back. So every opportunity for ASU is there for them to take advantage of it. They've lost back-to-back games. I mean, they came out of the bye week. They got booed out of their home stadium last week. So hopefully something changed. Hopefully something clicked within the leaders of this team. So yeah, I do feel good about ASU. I don't know if that's me being too optimistic about this team, because I can definitely understand that if people think that way about me right now.
Listen, I was super optimistic about this team early. I felt like I was early to the ASU bandwagon because through the first few weeks, I was like, this team looks damn good. It seems like they could do everything. Of course, that BYU loss took me back a little bit, but I was still all in on the bandwagon. But now I'm hopping off. I don't see it no more. So if you're gonna stay there, Donnie, you ride it all the way, my friend. You ride it till the sun comes up, my friend. But I'm gonna just stay here.
One more week. I'm giving them one more week, dude. If not, I'll be right there with you, hitchhiking onto another bandwagon.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Drake London's stats now: 88 catches, like you said, 7 touchdowns, almost 1,100 yards. I mean, I know this dude's a freak athlete because I think he was playing basketball for USC as a freshman. Like, this dude is a multi-sport athlete that could do it all. So I'm not surprised to see that he was putting up crazy stats like that. But before we head out here today, Donnie, since you're confident at least for one more week in ASU, let's give a prediction. ASU versus USC Saturday night. Who's taking it home? What's the score?
All right, man. I do think ASU bounces back. I do. And you know what? One more week might as well be the title of this podcast episode, because I feel like
I'm gonna title it that. One more week.
One more week. Give me Arizona State to emerge victorious over the USC Trojans by a score. I'll go 31-17.
I knew Drake London was the number 1 guy for USC, but after you told me those stats and knowing he's not going to be here, I'm flipping the score that ASU had against Washington State. 34-21. ASU pulls out the victory. It just won't be enough without Drake London there. And who knows? They might. I don't know if a 2 QB system is what you want. The Saints can do it because they have Sean Payton, one of the best offensive minds in NFL history. But outside of that, most teams can't make that work. So we'll see what happens with USC. And of course, if you want to stay up to date on all Sun Devil news, just head to allsundevils.com.